Welcome to a new Congregational Library History Talk. I'm Dr. Frank Bremer. Today's discussion will be between Dr. Adrian Chastain Weimer and Dr. Laurie Rogers-Stokes. Dr. Weimer is professor of history at Providence College. Her first book, Martyr's Mirror, Persecution and Holiness in Early Puritans, Baptists, and Quakers imagine themselves within historical narratives of persecution, especially the stories in John Fox's Book of Martyrs. She has published widely on the history of toleration, devotional practice, and political mobilizing in early America. She is a member of the Congregational Library Board of Directors. She will be engaging in a discussion with Dr. Laurie Rogers-Stokes, an independent scholar and contributing editor for the Congregational Library's New England Hidden Histories. Laurie has recently transcribed and edited for that website the Deacons' books of the First Church, Cambridge, 1638 to 1646, which offers important insight into the management of that church's affairs. Today, however, she will be discussing her recent book, Records of Trial from Thomas Shepard's Church in Cambridge, 1638 to 1649. And Adrian, I'll turn it over to you now.
Well, thank you so much, Frank, and thank you, Laurie, for being here. I'm thrilled to be able to finally discuss your book. And I want to say, first of all, how grateful I am for the depth of research that you put into this work. I have enjoyed it thoroughly. And I want to start with your description in the book about your own encounter with the Shepard manuscript in the archive and how that really transformed your understanding of the text and even the genre. Could you describe that experience for us?
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Frank, for that introduction. I was writing an article, I hoped, that I was going to submit to a journal about the women's records of these records of confession narratives, I thought. And I've never very visual, but I thought I should get some image to submit with this. I'll go over to New England Historical Genealogic Society and just take a picture of one of the pages. So I went over there and got the book, and I had always been relying on the single published transcriptions, which were by Sullivant and Woolley for one big parcel of them, and Mary Rhinelander McCarl for another shorter bunch. I'd never looked at the originals. They had never been reproduced in either of those published sources. And so when I opened it, it just immediately, without even reading it, without even knowing like who I was looking at, you could just see on the page that they were utterly different in literal form on the page than they were in the published transcriptions, where in the published transcriptions, they were just blocks of text down each page, no indenting, no paragraphing, no nothing, just an onslaught of sentences. Whereas in the original manuscripts, and in each one that I began to look at all of them, each one, there was clear paragraphing, clear, strong breaks that seemed to me to really show a passage of time, like maybe even 2 different sessions where people met with Shepard. And parts that were crossed out, that weren't preserved in the published transcriptions, additions, superscripts, all of these things I was very sensitive to from working with NEHH, with hidden histories. There's a lot of meaning in something you write down and then choose to cross out, or something you choose to add. And so it was mixed emotions, because clearly there was something very exciting going on here. And clearly my article was kaput at that point, and it turned into a much larger project that ended up with me taking photos of every single manuscript page for both sources and kind of starting over with them, which was rewarding but unexpected. And I just had to ask myself the whole time, like, why did it never occur to me to look at the originals? You know, you trust sources, you know, it's a good faith efforts of scholarship, and you think, you know, they've got it. There's no point in me reinventing the wheel. But in this case, there was.
It's amazing. And then you went back to the drawing board and you did a full analysis of this whole set of sources, looking very carefully at those features of the manuscript, at the way it was laid out on the page and the way there were starts and stops, and that you could get a different sense of, an entirely different sense of what the context and position was of the writing. So how should we approach Puritan spirituality differently if, as you argue, these narratives are informal records of trial rather than the formal relations leading to church membership? How should our approach change?
They're so much more exciting when you think of them as the informal records that Shepard kept just for himself of very private meetings. I think the usual approach, for anyone, for all of us who have used those records to contextualize or gain knowledge or shape our own arguments, is disappointment. Like, oh no, you're telling me it's something completely different.
Well, and
but
maybe
in this
we should
case,
take a moment to say what even is the typical record of trial that you're dealing with. Sort of, maybe we should back up a little bit and say what it is.
Yes, these have been presented as what we used to call confession narratives. If you wanted to become a full member of the early Congregationalist Church in New England, you had to give a convincing oral narrative of your experience of discovering that you had received God's grace, what we would call salvation. And people assumed, of course, when they saw these records of people describing their spiritual seeking, oh, that must be this. What else would it be? And they were kind of negative records in that sense, because they were really full of doubt and struggle and had a lot more difficulty than celebration. And I remember the first time I read through Salament and Woolley, I just had my pencil out. At the end of each one, I would write down yes, no, or question mark about whether they seemed like people who had really experienced the transforming experience of discovering that you were saved by God. And there weren't many that had a yes. So it, of course, fed a lot of thinking about Puritan society being very negative and the religion being very dark. If this was the best you could do, what a depressing society. So as I read through the originals, so many things that were made more sense of just by the actual, form of on the page, where you could see pauses and questions and answers and progress. And it made it much more positive. It became clear to me that most of the records started really strong, talking about someone's early life and their discovery of their new religion, and then went down into the trough of despair about their own sinfulness. All of that read pretty easily for most of them. And then it started to get choppier and choppier, and that gives you the sense of like, oh, these are people who are still working out the story. Like they understand where they've been, they're trying to figure out where they are. And that made sense of so much of what seemed to be negative struggle, relations of struggle. And it, from reading other sources, and I must say from reading Frank's book on lay faith and practices, it just became clear to me, like, these were in the moment snapshots, you are there kind of records that Shepard only kept for himself. These are in progress. Someday these people gave relations. Someday they stood up and did it. This was the background work that they must have been doing to do that. And it just makes sense, because as I say somewhere in the book, the point of giving a relation was to create a new saint, not to leave a written record. There was no reason why they would have wanted to preserve written records of this oral experience. So what you would want to do is keep your own private notes from when you last met with somebody, so you could pick them up again when they came back to you and help them along their way. I hope that answered the question. To me, it's just much more exciting.
It makes a lot of sense. And a lot of the conclusions you draw from this careful textual study and recontextualizing of these set of spiritual narratives has to do with the place and role and spirituality of women in particular. So I wonder if you would describe the spiritual journeys of some of the women that you think were some of the most powerful that you came across over the course of this project.
I came away feeling like I knew a few of these women very well. Mary Angier was someone I think of right away. Alice Steadman. These were women who, it was a level playing field in those early congregational days. Men and women were expected to read the Bible and think deeply and talk to each other and spend a lot of personal time searching on their journey of spirituality. And these women took that very seriously. And what struck me immediately was how, if you take the titles that Shepard gave them, where he put the person's name, off of these records, you can't tell in 9 out of 10 of them if it's a man or a woman speaking. When is that ever the case? Then or now? These women didn't talk about being mothers or daughters or sisters or wives. They talked about their spiritual lives. And once in a while, they might mention their husband in some minor way, like, oh, my husband said we should move here. And that's it. They were really able to compartmentalize. They had a separate spiritual identity that was paramount. And so this makes their record so powerful. The negativity that I think other people picked up on comes across much more as strength, where, yes, I'm in the middle of an epic spiritual seeking. And it's got tremendous highs and lows, but as one of them said, I can't remember who right now, to turn back, I would not. I think it's Catherine, the maid. I'm doing this. You know, what's more important than figuring out the status of your soul? And their commitment to this is really powerful. And I realized as I read through them, that it was clear that they mostly got to the step that other churches would see as final, which is you're utterly humiliated at God's feet. You totally give up trying. And then Shepard was saying to them, no, at that point, what you need to do is be so overcome by your love of Christ that you leap up from the feet of God and throw yourself on him. And that's when you'll find out if he clasps you to him or pushes you away, and you've got to do that. And a lot of the women address this pretty directly, like, that's too hard. I'm too scared. I can't do that. I'm just going to wait here passively until God reaches out to me. But the ones who decide, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to leap up and I'm going to risk all, and I'm going to throw myself on Christ's mercy. It's so powerful. You can really, it's like a page turner at that point. You can really get caught up in just in the power of that moment where all of the agency is in them. It's not even in God at that point. It's in them as individual people. And again, I can't think of another situation where women in the 17th century or many following centuries were in that position where it's them and God, and they have full agency to make decisions and choices and take actions and discover their own fate.
Yeah, these are powerful narratives, and that you get a sense even as you're reading of the women's voices, right? Of the excitement and the, as you say, agency involved. I wonder, do we know that most of these women did eventually become full church members? Do we have enough records to say that they did? And I wonder what you think. I've heard recently the argument that, as exclusive as the system can seem on a first glance, that, you have to engage in full church membership to be sort of a full, participating member and take the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist, that very few people who tried repeatedly and really, as you say, invested themselves were turned away or didn't make it. Is that the sense that you get, that this was a process that most people, once they started, that they finished, or did people find despair and end up stopping?
Unknown and no. Shepard's church, actually church records from Shepard's time were mostly lost almost immediately. Like his successor, Jonathan Mitchell, didn't have them. So all I know of is Mitchell made a record of everyone who was a member when he started. And these women are in there. So yes, I think most of them who appear in Shepard's notebook did eventually make that relation successfully. What I find, it's the typical glass half full or empty. If your whole job in life is to find out whether you have been saved or damned, you can see that as really glass half empty. Like, do I want to find out that I've been damned? Or glass half full, I might find out that I am saved. And just listening to these women recount talking to each other. There's many times, and I do think of Mary Angier here, where she says, I went to my neighbor and I said, I'm just giving up here. I used to be really confident about my spirituality, and now I'm just not. And every time they talk about talking with someone else, often other women, that other person says, no, don't give up. You can't give up. You don't know. Don't make a decision based on your knowledge. You're trying to discern God's will here. Don't give up. It was definitely glass half full for them. they often would like to say, oh, a murderer might actually have been saved by God. You never know. We can't tell. And so a lot of them will recount these moments that seem to like give them the strength to keep searching again. And I don't think people made multiple attempts at a relation. I think these records of trial show that you would meet privately many times before you felt either you discovered you actually had that moment of realization. And then you would make a relation. I don't think anyone was sent when they were still wondering. And this is the big question, like, was Shepard an easy grader and he felt sorry for people? And if you just had a little bit of hope, you could become a full member? No, his own writings make that very clear that that's not a thing. So I think nobody attempted a relation until they were really sure. And the few people who in these records had that moment, when they describe it, you're not in doubt. I think Nathaniel Sparrowhawk says, I raced around the room and I was throwing out of the window anybody who didn't say, praise God. So the moment is powerful. You're not wondering, gosh, did I have that? And that's when you would give a relation. And people were very patient. There was none of this, hey, you've been on this spiritual seeking thing for 20 years now. It's clearly not happening for you. That was just not something that they said. And they really extended a generosity of spirit to each other about that.
That's very interesting, and lovely to hear you discuss the conversations among the neighbors, that women went to each other as well as to their pastors as kind of spiritual physician. So I wonder what you think about the study of Puritanism after this project. What new questions does this set of discoveries inspire, or where would you like to see the field go?
It is evergreen. Is it Miller who says in 1930, his dissertation advisor said, oh God, don't study the Puritans. It's so played out. Like, this continues to be such a fascinating time that was just so brief. You wouldn't think that people who were in the ascendancy for only about 80 years could produce so much that is so fascinating, but they did. I think studies of Puritan New England right now are really characterized by trying to bring in Puritans into relation with other groups. Sometimes it's that tiny, tiny fraction of English people who were not Puritans, which is pretty tiny, or Indigenous and Black people who were there. And I think that's got boundless possibilities. I also, because I work with hidden histories, my next project that I'm working on right now is using the church records, even beyond, the truly Puritan time, into the early 1700s and mid 1700s, to really inform our understanding. So often, there's, even in recent scholarship, people will attempt to describe how Puritan religion was, and they're just not right. And we now have, like, how could they be? Because before Hidden Histories and some other work, especially at Yale, we just didn't have a lot of church records that were available. They were still under the secretary's desk in the church office. Now you can read thousands of pages of how life really was in a congregational church and town community over centuries in New England, and to really be able to really back up the civil records we have. I think that's very fruitful. I'm studying the churches in 4 different places where I've done the records, in Rowley and Grafton and what's the town on Martha's Vineyard? I'm forgetting, where we have lots of civil records. And we have an understanding of a lot of Indigenous people just through those records of land sales or when they were in trouble with the law, etc. All these negative, very political kinds of records. And then when you bring in church records for these people, it fills everyone out as a real human being. So people, English or Indigenous or Black, who you've only met through court records, which are kind of stilted and never really as objective as they hope to be, are filled out into like full technicolor when you find them in church records, where they are seen as spiritual people in relationship with other people in a non-political or economic way. And so I've taken a few stories that are covered in depth in each town's church records, and I'm just kind of telling them. And I think everybody being able to access this is going to make a big difference in the things we say about how the religion was and its impact on the towns and in New England in general.
Fantastic. Well, I know Frank and I share your enthusiasm for the New England hidden history, and I'm excited to see the fruits of that project. And, you know, going back full circle, how transformative it is to actually see these manuscripts and work with the manuscripts and go back to the sources. There's still a great deal to be done. So thank you so much, Lori, for taking the time to interview us. Congratulations on your wonderful book. And I'll turn it back to Frank.
Thank you.
Okay. And just to add, thanks a lot to both of you for a great discussion and one which I hope gets people inspired to go and read Lori's book, and also to log into the Congregational Library and Archives and look at some of the material in Art in Hidden Histories. Thank you very much, both of you.